Are you a part of the sandwich generation that is preparing for retirement while also juggling paying for your kids' college and even perhaps caring for your aging parents? Well, you're not alone. In fact, 48% of adults are providing some sort of care or financial support to their adult children. And an additional 25% are also supporting their parents as well. You're not going to want to miss this episode or this next edition of the Planning for Retirement podcast, where we help educate and empower you to achieve financial security. My name is Kevin Lao. I'm your host. And today I thought it'd be great to have this discussion with a longtime former colleague and friend, Jeff McDermott. Jeff and I worked together in the same office at TIAA in Jacksonville for 6 years, and I've gotten to know him personally over the years. He is a top-notch CFP professional, and I love his mission, helping the next generation create and build wealth. Hence the name of his firm, Create Wealth Financial Planning. And when he's not running his firm, he's hanging with his family, his dog Pi, playing the piano, and lifting weights in his garage gym. More on that one soon. Without further ado, here's my interview with Jeff. All right, well, I'm super excited about this topic we're going to dive into today. We're going to be talking to the sandwich generation. Okay, we've been hearing a lot of this term over the last decade or so. The sandwich generation. Let's call them younger baby boomers, Gen X. Folks that are planning for retirement themselves, but they also have kids that they need to raise. Maybe they're sending their kids to college or paying for private school, or just dealing with all of the expensive activities that our children do. But then they're also dealing with potentially aging parents and parents who may or may not have planned for their own retirement, and they're sort of feeling squeezed on both sides. And so the sandwich generation, there's a lot of things to address here. And I'm super excited to have a friend and also former colleague, Jeff McDermott, on this podcast. And Jeff and I, we were colleagues for 6 years at TIAA. Jeff runs his own fee-only financial planning firm in Jacksonville. And I'm going to let him introduce himself on that in a minute. But Jeff has over 20 years of experience. He's a certified financial planner. He also, I believe, has a special designation for student loan planning, which is going to be part of our conversation today. And so Jeff broke off, left the big firm environment, wanted to do financial planning his own way, and work with the type of client that he's excited to work with, which is sort of the mid-career professionals who are juggling a lot of these responsibilities we're going to talk about today. In addition to a little bit of working out in his garage, which I'm going to let him talk about as well. So just a little plug. If you're on Instagram, you need to check out Dollars in Deadlifts, I believe. So we'll link that in the show notes as well. But I love Jeff's content on Instagram, man. It is gold. So I don't even care if you liked it, bodybuilding or whatever it might be, or working out. You need to follow his content on Instagram. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good to be here. Look at us. Who would have thought?
I know. Listen, what's funny? The last guest I had on, Brian Bonowitz, former TIAA portfolio manager. Yeah. So did you know Brian?
I know the name. I don't know if our paths ever crossed, but definitely as soon as I knew him because we actually were both in the relationship consultant role for a little while. That was my entry role in a TIA, and he was down the hall from me.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, Brian was a great guest. He came on. He's doing some really cool stuff in AI. And so I thought it would be really good to have him just chat with our audience about what should we be worried about with AI. And also we talked a little about blockchain and cryptocurrency. So that was a fun conversation. But yeah, super excited about this conversation, Jeff. So before we dive into the content, just, would love to just hear a little bit about your story from leaving big firm environment to launching your own firm, and just sort of telling the audience a little bit about who you serve and why you decided to serve those types of individuals.
Yeah. So I worked at a couple different big firms along the way, and it's nice that they have a lot of the resources. They provide a lot of training. You get a lot of repetitions working with clients and seeing a lot of stuff. But comes a point in time where you just feel like you want to do things your own way. You have maybe a different kind of client demographic you want to point your advisory services towards. I know that we're going to talk about that today. And sometimes the best way to do that, sometimes the only way it feels like to do that, is to strike out on your own and take the leap, set up shop, start doing things your way, price your services the way you want to price them, reach out to the kinds of clients that you want to reach out and work with, take the planning process end to end. You mentioned student loan planning. That's not something I would have really touched in the previous role. I do a ton of cash flow planning with clients now because they are in that phase. They're kind of in that 35 to 50 age range, and cash flow is king. That's what drives the plan. How much money do we have to put towards long-term goals, short-term goals, towards the kids, towards living life now? Maybe they're helping a parent, an elderly parent. So it's just a totally different kind of financial planning than I ever did before. And I think it's really an underserved market, which is what also pointed me in that direction.
Yeah, I think there's so much truth to that. I mean, I was thinking about XY Live last year, and I believe it was Atlanta, and one of the keynote speakers was talking about this idea of niching and how she was serving the sandwich generation, but had since left serving that niche because it was just emotionally, it was exhausting because you're dealing with a lot of really complex issues. So a lot of them are financial related, but it's like you're dealing with, someone who's trying to take care of their own family, but then they have parents who are maybe living with them and caring for them. So like, do you need like a therapy degree? You know what I mean? Like a psychology degree and be like a professional therapist for this kind of stuff? Like, how do you deal with this on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, that's funny you say that. I feel like I've never really thought about it. That might just be my personality. So maybe you've got to have the right personality, deal with all the complexities of the sandwich generation. And you're right about the emotional pull. I have kids that are, having babies while, well, not during the planning, but while we're building the financial plan. And that's always exciting, right? There's a lot of life changes that happen. And then you see the other end of the spectrum. I had clients last month who experienced the death of a parent. And so you do have to, you have to work through that. I think you probably do have the right personality where you can provide support. You can also provide those some objectivity. Maybe you are not super emotionally involved in things. You have to be able to step back and provide that objective view of the world and say, hey, this is where things are. This is what you can do, or this is where you really should be putting your resources toward. So never thought about it, but I think you might be onto something with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I do feel like, sometimes we are sort of behavioral therapists in a way, on the financial side, I feel like people share information with us. They don't even share with their own doctors or their own children, sometimes even their spouses. And so, I definitely feel like, we take a lot of pride in what we do and sort of the trust that our clients have in us. So, you talked about student loans at the very end. And so maybe we'll start there, right? I actually, in prepping for this, I found an article that Forbes put out, I think it was this year. And they mentioned that this was the first year where the student loan, well, actually, first of all, the student loan debt, the national student loan debt is currently at $1.73 trillion. Okay, nuts. Wow. But that's down from $1.76 trillion in 2023. So it's actually the first time that the student loan debt has actually gone down year over year since prior to 2006. So let's maybe start there. And student loans are insanely high. How are you helping clients plan for college savings for their kids nowadays? And how is that different from when we got into the business maybe 15 to 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think there's two ways we could talk about the problem in the context of this chat. There is people that have graduated. And part of the reason I sought out some student loan planning certification is because it's so complex. And so many of my clients, especially if they were still in their 30s, or maybe they had gone to some advanced education, like they were a doctor or an attorney or a dentist, and just graduated later with a lot of debt. So people were coming to me with student loan debt that I needed to know how to handle. So there's the element of helping the borrower when the borrower is caught in the sandwich generation, right? Trying to figure out, how do I do all this stuff and manage my student debt? And so a big part of the certified student loan professional program that I went through is navigating the various federal repayment plans. How do you qualify for them? What are the different nuances between the different repayment plans? If you are somebody who's working in public service, like you work for a government or you work for a nonprofit agency, you can also qualify for a little bit more accelerated path to forgiveness. So helping people navigate that and balance. I have a client right now who we are going to aggressively pursue some student loan, income-based repayment so that they can have cash flow to put towards other goals, like accumulating cash to buy a first house, things like that. So there's navigating the student loan debt for the borrower. And then there's also, we could look at it from the standpoint of you're the parent sending your child through college. Everybody we talk to, has the dream, or one of their goals is, hey, we want to send our child through college without debt, or we want to pay for college. And sometimes that's realistic and reasonable, and sometimes it's not, especially when we talk about graduate school and the amount of tuition that a high-level business school or medical school commands. Student debt's probably going to be part of the picture. So how do you handle that? How do you avoid some of the pitfalls of student debt so you have better outcomes at the end of the day? That's something we can talk through as somebody who is sending their children through college.
Yeah. So what are some of those conversations like? Let's say you're working with someone who's got a kid in high school. You know what I mean? And so conversations are now starting about planning for college and thinking about college. Like, when do they come to you in terms of, hey, Jeff, do you think this is a good idea, or should I try to do this, or is it more like, hey, Jeff, my kid got accepted to this private school, liberal arts school. We're just going to send him there. Can I afford it? Like
Right.
when does it normally happen? And when do you recommend that conversation begin to happen?
Yeah. Everybody comes to it differently. Again, you do have, and a lot of it's based on their own college experience, right? We tend to want to reflect our college experience on our kids, or maybe we learn something in college and say, hey, don't do what I do. Yeah. So everybody brings sort of their own history to that conversation. I find also, as the financial planning profession continues to evolve, we need to educate our clients that this is something we can be talking about with you, right? So if you're listening to this and you're working with Kevin, or you've got somebody you're working with, make sure that you're involving that in the conversation, because that's what we're here for. And I think it starts with just the conversation around what's the college experience you want to have for your children. When we're thinking through how much to save for college, which maybe is another part of the discussion we'll get into, I try to think through, you've got in-state public school, you've got out-of-state public school, and you've got private school. Three very different approaches, different bills that come with that kind of education, different ways to think through saving. So what do you want to do? What do you want your children to do? And you need to have some serious conversations, going back to the emotions you talked about, on what's the appropriate college, what's the appropriate amount to spend for the kind of degree that your child's seeking, right? I think of it like a house, right? If you've been house shopping and you find that dream home and you fall in love with that home, and it's a competitive market and bids for that home start going up, and well, the inspection didn't come back quite like we wanted to, but man, we love this home. How does that end? Right? Not well. Right.
Never good.
Checks get written.
So
you also have to, you have to think about that with the college experience. Don't become, romantically involved with a college when you might be able to get good education, undergrad education at that state school, and then go to Ivy League for the private or the graduate or something like that.
Yeah, and that's so like, when I saw that article come, with the Forbes article, I was like, that's sort of what came to my mind is like, all right, maybe it is this like realization, like higher education is insanely overpriced. I mean, the inflation rate on education, I remember when I first got into the business in 2008, we used to run these cash flow projections for college, and we would always assume this 8% inflation rate just because that's what historically did. I do believe that has tapered down a little bit. I don't know what the exact stats are in inflation, but like I said, probably depends on in-state, out-of-state versus private. But like, is that potentially the reason for this national student debt coming down? Is people are like, I'm just not going to pay the price there. I'm not going to borrow as much. Maybe there is more education out there. Or then the other side of my brain said, well, maybe it's because of the student loan forgiveness that has, you know what I mean? Is that, how does that factor in? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that, and also about some of those updates around student loan forgiveness that people should be aware about.
Yeah, I think there's probably a little bit of both. So there has been some forgiveness. I think a lot of the forgiveness that hits the news media is overhyped and oversold. It's a lot of
the media overhyping something. Come on,
surprise. A lot of what you hear about the forgiveness that gets handed out, some of it is colleges that were for-profit colleges that maybe have lost their accreditation, and so there is a program to pursue basically elimination of the debt if the college kind of didn't hold up their end of the bargain. You also have some of these income-driven student loan programs are starting to mature. And what I mean when I say mature is most of them have a 20 to 25 year time period of payback under the income-driven plan before that balance gets forgiven, right? So a lot of these programs are just sort of getting into being where they're a little bit more than 20, 25 years old, and people are actually becoming eligible for that.
Got it.
There may be some forgiveness that's actually hitting the books that just has been out there for a long time. And then, yes, I do think people are reevaluating college. I think that you have, programs like my home state of Florida here, where we have the Bright Futures program that can actually cover quite a bit of undergrad education. And so those are some other ways that cost of college is quote unquote coming down. The market's very much out of whack because there's so much student loans out there and they're so easy to get, right? You don't need a credit score to get a student loan. You just need to be in school. The money's out there, and when we pour money on a problem, it's like gas on a fire, and it just keeps blowing up. So other systematic things have to happen. My view of it, my job is, hey, you've got the debt. Here's programs you can take advantage, right? Or if you're a parent sending your kid to school, the advice might be, hey, try to avoid these Parent Plus loans because they come with higher interest rates and much less generous repayment options. You really have stripped down income-based repayment options with the parent loans.
Okay.
Versus your child has a wide range of income-based repayment options. your child, yes, they may graduate and not have the kind of income you have as a 22-year-old undergraduate or a recent graduate, but that's where they fit into the income-based program and say, hey, I've got my first job out of college. I'm making whatever it is, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year versus student debt of maybe $100,000 a year. They can qualify for these programs that take some of that payment burden off of that you wouldn't be able to qualify for because you're maybe 50 or 60 and you're coming out of your peak earnings years.
It's good. So, I mean, maybe that kind of ties back to what you're saying, like that emotional goal of like, hey, I want my kid to graduate debt free. So like, that's why potentially the parents are taking those loans out in their name. But what you're saying is that may not be the best financial move. It may be, it may not be. I think the point is evaluate both options, with someone who knows what they're doing, or do your homework and then make the decision from there. But don't make an emotional decision.
That's right. I would, in that situation, I tend to say, if you want to pay for your kid's college, but their loans are going to be involved, that's great. Have your child take the loans out. You can make the payments. And then something like that.
So can they make the payments directly, or like, what do they do? Gift them the money and then hopefully they pay it all? Like, hopefully it goes to them as opposed to like going to the bar or something like that, or?
Right. You could go about it a couple different ways. You could try to pay directly, or whatever is, it feels appropriate between you and the kids.
I guess. You have, your kid, right?
That's right.
So, all right. So saving, you mentioned the prepaid, or you mentioned the Bright Future Scholarship, but like, let's talk about the vehicles that you can use to save for college. Obviously the most popular being the 529, the 529 plan where you can put money aside and save money tax free, assuming it's used for qualified education. What's sort of that balancing act? Like, do you try to fully fund that 529 so it covers a full private education, or do you sort of balance it out with some other sort of non-traditional educational vehicles?
Yeah, absolutely. We are not trying to fund 100% of the college experience from the 529 because we don't know. And not only do we not know what the actual sticker cost is going to be, because there could be various forms of scholarship or financial aid, or, if your child's 2, who knows what school they're going to go to. The other part of the equation is also, if they're 2 and college is 16 years away, what's college even going to look like then? We've talked about just shifting ideas about college. More parts of college may be coming online, which theoretically should be less expensive. So when I have that initial conversation with a client about what do we want to think about with college, what's the experience we want to plan for, again, are we dead set on private school? Are we most likely leaning towards in-state public school? And do we want to try to fund 50% to 60% of that through the 529?
Yeah. Right? Okay, 50 to 60. Okay, so that's kind of like a nice little rule of thumb. So like if you're trying to pay for education costs all in total, let's say it's $100,000 today, maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 to $60,000 in a 529. Then what about the other half? Just pay out of pocket or take out loans, or tap into your retirement accounts. What do you typically do after that?
Yeah, so hopefully we've got some other resources we could put together. So don't forget the mighty brokerage investment account.
Yeah.
Just a regular non-retirement account is a great multi-purpose investment account for a variety of goals, as long as you've got a little bit of time to wait them out, right? If you're more than 4 or 5 years away from college, you should be okay to use a regular investment account. And again, the thing about that is you can pull that money out anytime for any purpose. Yeah. It is not quite as tax friendly as the 529, but brokerage accounts aren't bad. You get the benefit of long-term capital gains tax rates, which are, generally better than ordinary tax rates. And just the flexibility that if we need to use this money for college, it's there. That's what it's there for. We'll pull it out and use it for that. Hey, if we don't, great. Maybe that's the vacation home. Yeah. Maybe that's, a big trip that we all go to celebrate when junior's out of college. So there's a lot you can do with that brokerage money. There are some other strategies. People look at Roth IRAs because you have some exemptions for educational withdrawals there. More exotic things people look at, like rental houses and life insurance and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be complicated. 529s are awesome tools. Supplement it with some other standard investments.
Yeah, that's how my father-in-law, he bought a rental property back in the day, and that was used to pay for his son's college. So he loves telling me that story, and I love hearing that story because it's a really cool one. But life insurance, we hear a lot, and I've talked a little about life insurance on the show before, and as you all know, as the listeners, like, I'm not anti-life insurance by any stretch. Like, I don't sell life insurance anymore, but I spent the first 12 years of my career with my insurance license and selling insurance to some capacity. So I do believe it fits to a certain degree, but I see all these TikTok cowboys and cowgirls out there slinging life insurance, like it's the Swiss Army knife. So, I mean, do you feel like that could be a potential supplement to a 529 and or brokerage account and or rental property, in terms of using that as a savings tool for college?
I think it's tough because, like you probably talked about on the show, it's so policy dependent, right? Is it a good policy that's going to build some value that you can use over that time? Is it really going to get drained by fees and be just, kind of a bad position? So much goes into the design of the policy, right? To make sure it fits for that tuition goal that's 15 to 18 years away, probably when you're looking at this. I would even kind of put you on the spot and throw the question back. Is that enough time for a permanent policy to mature and really do what it's supposed to do over that time, right? So everything can fit. Is it overly complex? Is it unnecessarily complex? Is it the best strategy for that solution? I would probably need more convincing than that.
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of things. So first of all, I actually just did a whiteboard fireside chat on this. So if you're not subscribed to the YouTube, the Planning for Retirement podcast YouTube, subscribe to that, okay? Because not only are we posting the videos for all of our podcasts, but I'm also doing fireside chats twice a week. And I just did one on number one, should I own life insurance in retirement? And number two, broke down the different types of life insurance. And I did run through an example on where that break-even point typically happens. And with the regular kind of standard whole life policy, you could expect it anywhere from, 10 to 14 years, again, depending on your age, health, and sort of how you design the policy. But with that being said, there absolutely are ways you can design the policy where, and we're talking break even, meaning your cumulative premiums equal your cash value. Okay. So you don't even have a positive rate of return yet on your cash value. Now, by the way, you had death benefit along the way. So that's obviously some value, but sure, there are ways you can design it where you can kind of front load a bunch of the premiums and sort of make that crossover point happen, maybe even in year 5 or 6, depending on, how young you are, how healthy you are. But I'm not a believer in saying, hey, let's use this as a primary or even secondary savings vehicle for college. I'm sort of in the mindset like, let's get the 529 baseline. I'm with you there. Let's get the 529 baseline and or prepaid, right? And then let's supplement that with a brokerage account, rental property, of course. I like real estate as well. Like personally, I like to invest in real estate. So, that could be another tool that I use for my boys is just to use properties because you could use them for retirement as well. Or if they don't go to college, if college looks different, because my boys are 3 and 5, 3 and 5. So it's like, what's that going to look like in 10 years, 13 years, 15 years down the road? I just don't know. And, if they don't need all of the money that's in their 529, well, great. I have this house they can just own, I'll give it to them, or they can use it for their first down payment, sell it and use it for their first down payment. So I think that flexibility is nice, but certainly the life insurance component, as I've talked about on the YouTube channel and on the show, if you need or want permanent life insurance, meaning the actual death benefit, then let's have a conversation about how you could potentially use the cash value as well, but never use the cash value as sort of the lead. And if you're working with someone who's pitching you insurance and you feel like you're getting a hard sell, take a step back, pump the brakes, go talk to a fiduciary who understands insurance and who can diagnose what the recommendation is and if it fits in your plan. So anyways, all right, no more about life insurance, off my soapbox on that front. So college savings, and this doesn't have to be, by the way, just for your child or just for yours in terms of planning for yourself. This could also be for grandchildren, you know what I mean? In terms of paying for education for your grandchild. So if you're listening and let's say you just had your first grandbaby, congratulations, your grandbaby is 1 or 2 years old and you're thinking, hey, I want to get ahead and start saving aggressively for college for that individual. Well, in my opinion, it probably makes sense to have a little bit of a conversation with the parents about that too, in terms of what you plan to do, because that might impact how they plan for college. Like if in your mind, you're like, hey, I'm going to grandbaby Johnny, I'm going to fully fund a private school, even if he goes to Harvard. So you're going to just stack, a couple $100,000 away for college. Well, that probably should impact how the parents are saving for college too, right? So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I do have clients come to me. Sometimes they say, hey, my parents got it covered, college.
Right.
But sometimes there's not a lot of details. And so, I'm caught in this spot of like, well, I have to kind of take you, like, I'm not going to press you on, how much money do your parents have? But also it sounds like that conversation has been fleshed out. Mm-hmm. So, I think that people in this sandwich generation too, they can take the lead on some of these conversations, even though it's a little bit uncomfortable. And there's resources online and books and things out there that you can read to kind of say, hey, how do I have this conversation? But yeah, what does the parent support or grandparent support look like for college?
Mm-hmm.
And then for the grandparents, are they doing it in a tax smart way or a tax efficient way, right? We know that there are tremendous gifting opportunities available for grandparents with 529s. If if your grandparents have a large estate and you're worried about estate taxes, there are things they can do like writing the check directly to the institution to take that money out of the estate. So like lots of financial planning, they might have 60% of the way covered. The money might be there. Are we maximizing the value of each of those dollars, right? From a tax standpoint and estate efficiency and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's good. No, I think that's a big part of the conversation I love having with clients, especially the ones that are retired. They've experienced retirement for a few years and like, okay, I think I've sort of gotten past the phase of like just freaking out about the first couple of years in retirement. Because I think generally speaking, that's when clients are most concerned is like, the sequence of return risk. And it's like everyone sort of thinks about what if I retire into a recession or bear market? And those are legitimate concerns. I'm not downplaying those. But once they're past that, they're like, hey, I've got a little bit of extra cash and I plan to leave this to my kids anyways. Do I just keep reinvesting this or do I start making gifts during my lifetime and actually see my kids sort of utilize that or grandkids utilize that? So love that strategy you threw out about just writing a check directly to the institution. That's a win-win situation where you're making the gift. It's out of your taxable estate. And obviously you're helping for college as well. And of course, funding a 529, that's great. But speaking of 529s, I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the Secure Act 2.0 and that sort of new opportunity. Why don't you talk through that a little bit for the listeners that don't know about the new rules around Roth to 529 to Roth.
Yeah. And just to set that up, the big question I always get and why we don't fully 100% fund college from the 529 is what about the leftover money? Now, you actually have more flexibility than you might think with that leftover money. You can send it to a variety of relatives, other siblings of, other kids of yours. You can keep it and make it at that eventual grandparent gift, right? Hang on to that money and then it can be handed down yet again. So you have some flexibility with it, but you also now have the ability with this new Secure Act 2.0 rule to help the child fund Roth IRAs early in their adult life, potentially. So it's really fresh. I haven't actually done any of it yet myself. I don't know many advisors who have done much of it just yet because it is so new. But there are provisions now where you can take up to about $35,000 of that excess 529 money and use it as Roth IRA contributions for the 529 beneficiary. And there's some other rules around it. I wouldn't just go out and start doing this tomorrow without looking at how to do it, right? Like everything, there's some rules to follow. But it's a nice additional sort of, escape valve or panic button for the 529. If you do have that leftover money, it's another thing you can do with.
Yeah. And, and one of the things is, one of those caveats is it has to have a 15-year seasoning period. And so I've had clients reach out to me, oh, hey, Kevin, I love this rule. Like we put it out in a newsletter or, plugged it on a podcast or something like, love this new rule. I'm going to just fund a 529 and then I'm going to just immediately convert it to Roth. It's got a season in there for 15 years. So the IRS they are one step ahead of you on that front. You can't just go ahead and fund a 529 and convert it to a Roth right away. But if you've already funded the Roth and it's been sitting there for 15 years, I've actually had clients take advantage of that this year. 2024 has been the first year you can take advantage of that where they can do those rollovers. So I'll put a link in the show notes about that Secure Act 2.0, the 529 rules, and we'll make sure you guys have that resource as well. So good stuff about college. Let's talk about how to balance the idea of, okay, well, let's say they're saving for college, but now college is done, or they're saving for college and they're thinking about saving for retirement. How do you possibly get them to balance those two? Because those are two very big financial priorities. So how do you get people to balance planning for college versus planning for retirement?
Yeah, it is hard to do. And you have to talk through prioritization. You have to talk through what's really important. As you talk to somebody and as you think about your own situation, there might be just certain things that are very meaningful to you, very valuable to you. Maybe education had a substantial impact on your life and you want to make sure your kids have that. Well, then maybe you want to lean towards the college savings a little bit. But remember, and we also have to stand here as a financial planner and be that objective, unemotional outside viewer like we talked about earlier. And it's the old cliche, but retirement's the only goal you can't borrow for, right?
Good,
so we do try to make sure that your retirement is in place. We're funding that first. And we try to make saving for those multiple goals as easy as we can by fitting it into the cash flow, by helping you start early, right? It's up to us to kind of bring that up and say, hey, junior's 1 year old. Have we looked at that 529 yet? Because we can do the math. And if you start saving now, it's $200 a month.
Yeah.
If you start saving 10 years from now, it's whatever, $500 a month or something like that.
Yep.
So you can also do yourself a favor by starting early. But thinking through your priorities and your values and what you're willing to give on a little bit versus what you're willing to put more emphasis on, that's really up to you to kind of construct your life and tell us where you want to go and have those clear goals, because clear goals are what align all the decisions in your financial plan.
No, that's good. I mean, I do. The number one thing I consistently hear for the folks that are nearing retirement or in retire, they start working with us. The number one thing they always say is, I never want to be a burden on my kids, or I never want to be a burden on my loved ones. And so the best way you can avoid that is to have a very secure retirement yourself. And so making sure you're on track for your own retirement so you can maintain your own financial independence, so you don't have to depend on your children down the road. That could honestly be the best gift you give them, not fully loading up a 529 plan. Obviously, that would be nice. Help them, graduate debt free. But, call me kind of old school, Jeff, but I sort of I like the idea of kids sort of working for, paying for college themselves a little bit. Hey, if you want to spend 50 grand a year, on college, you're going to foot the bill for 50% or borrow for 50%. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm old school about that, but I don't know, like in your practice, if you sort of step on clients' toes in terms of what they want to do based on your philosophies, like, I sort of tell people that, like, philosophically, like, I want my kids to have skin in the game. Because, personally, like, my parents were like that. Not like that. They wanted to fully fund. Like, my dad, he's from a third world country. Education was everything, from his family. Like, that was the number one thing for him, was education. So, like, he engraved that into my brother and I in our brains. And so we didn't have any skin in the game. And so, like, if I had skin in the game, would I have tried harder my first semester of college when I was, away from home? I probably would have, Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, what say you about that conversation?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to have some expectation, right? That everybody's contributing, right? This is everybody's responsibility to make college happen. Yeah. There's also a lot of ways to, a couple of things. So, there's some ways to reduce the cost of college, right? We talked a little bit about this earlier. There is a real return on investment calculation with colleges, right? Have that conversation on what are we actually going to study. We're not here to crush dreams. You can study what you want, but we're also going to make sure that where we attend and the cost of the degree is going to match the potential of that degree, right? You had asked earlier, kind of when do we start having that conversation? So my oldest is a freshman in high school right now. And
crazy, by the way. Golly.
But that conversation is very much on the table, right? And she has some ideas on where she would like to go and what she wants to study, and that's all good. But we have just empathetic conversations and real life conversations on, hey, let's understand what we're studying, where we're going to go, the value of an education at one school versus another. I really try to make that distinction, undergraduate versus graduate, right? If you're going to go on to medical school or get an advanced degree or whatever, at the end of the day, that's what matters. Let's put our resources towards that and get through the first 4 years. So doing the things you can do to keep the cost down, starting early, making sure the kids have some skin in the game so that they feel some connection and some responsibility for their own education. I think that all makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. Ownership of the decision. And understanding the impact of the different decisions. Hey, you could go this route or you could go this route. That was my kids' orientation for their school. I was walking around and I ran into this senior in high school and I was just chatting with them. I was like, hey, it's just kind of the standard small talk. Hey, where are you going to go off next year? He's like, I'm actually going to go to, what's the Chattanooga Chat State? Yeah. It's a 2-year degree or 2-year associates. And then he wants to transfer into a 4-year. I'm like, he's like, yeah, it's basically going to be free for me to go there. And then I can transfer. I'm like, who's been in your head? Because whoever your parents are, they're doing a good job. I mean, obviously that's the most financially responsible decision you can make. But so he sort of understood the impact of those different routes you could go. And I think those are important conversations to have as early as possible with your kids.
Yeah. 2 + 2 is underrated strategy.
Oh my goodness. It's amazing. So I was like, I'm going to remember your name and I'm going to come after you when my boys are in high school. I'm like, hey, this is what this guy did. So he'll probably be running the school at that point. But So, all right. So like a lot of these folks that are now done with college planning, maybe you're now an empty nester. I think that's our largest audience is in that 50 to 60 range. And now you're feeling like you need to catch up for retirement. What are some of those things that open up once you hit 50 that you can start thinking about in terms of like aggressively catching up for retirement?
Yeah, you can do it. So remember, over 50, you've got increases in the amount of retirement money you can put away, and it's pretty generous. Yep. So it's about a $7,000 or $8,000 difference that you can put in those retirement accounts.
Yep.
As a over 50 saver. I think what's important for me, and when I think about the way I work with clients as well, and we talked about cash flow being so important and such a big part of this, don't lose any money, right? Don't let any of that money evaporate. So as certain expenses go away, the kids get out on their own, the kids get off the auto insurance, the tuition bills are paid or whatever it might be. What is the next thing you're going to do with that money? Right? So that's money that can now go to max out those 401ks if you're not already doing that. It can go into that brokerage account. If you have, again, that general investment account that's still very useful for retirement, even though it's not a quote unquote retirement account.
Yep.
Even if you're putting money in the 401k, you can still do Roth IRAs or backdoor Roth IRAs, right? We don't let any of those stones go unturned. We don't let any dollars go missed. And my personal favorite account, which everybody, regardless of age, should be talking about, I don't know if you want to get to this now or later, is max out that HSA. That's your secret weapon for retirement.
Absolutely. No, I've mentioned before, HSA is my favorite vehicle to use, the triple, the tax trifecta. And I mentioned on the show that after having 3 kids in a 16-month period, all 3 of which were in the NICU for multiple weeks, healthcare costs were a little expensive. And so my wife, she's the one that's the one bill she takes care of is our kids' medical bills. And she was like, what is going on? Because of course we're self-employed. We have our own insurance. It was a nightmare. So 2023, we switched to a no deductible health plan. That was the first year I couldn't contribute to an HSA because of course you must have a high deductible health plan in order to qualify. But if you have one, or if it makes sense for you to get a high deductible health plan, look into the HSA. Absolutely. I think that's great advice, Jeff, is try to get as much as you can in that final phase of saving for retirement. Because even if you're 50 or 55 listening to this, what's the max? You could put over $8,000 a year if you're on a family plan, into an HSA if you're over 55. If you do that for 5 years, you could build up a nice little $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 balance in an HSA. And that could cook and compound for another decade or two, even after you retire. So that could be meaningful. So don't feel like, hey, I don't have an HSA. I hear that all the time. Like when I meet with someone who's 55, like, I never did an HSA, so that's not really going to be part of my plan. You might be able to contribute for another 10 years, before you're Medicare eligible to the HSA. So let's look at that. Let's evaluate that. That's great advice.
And for your listeners, don't forget tax deduction up front and tax free on the way out. So we don't have to decide traditional Roth. You get both. Yeah. And the key point I want to make sure everybody hears is try not to spend that money now, right? Leave that in there, let it grow, right? And a lot of people, I think, just don't do the math, and it's hard to do because health insurance plan can be so complicated. But a lot of times, especially for your W-2 workers that have company provided healthcare, it's different for us out in the self-employed world sometimes, but those company high deductible plans are often priced in a way that they can be a lot cheaper than the regular plan. Even though you're paying more out of pocket when you back out those premiums, the higher premiums on the quote unquote standard plan, plus maybe a company match that goes in, I find it hard not to come out ahead even with the high deductible plan. So give it a serious look. It's not for everybody, but don't be afraid of it either.
That's a good point. I've even run into what I feel are pretty savvy clients that I work with, and they have sort of been trained that they need to spend their HSA in a year. They don't realize. They're sort of confusing it with the flexible spending account, which is not so flexible. That's the one you do have to empty out for the most part in a given calendar year. In HSA, you can let that thing ride. And once you hit a certain balance, typically it's $1,000 in cash. Now you can invest the difference and just let that thing cook and compound. And just always remember, save those receipts in a nice little folder you can keep forever. And you can reimburse yourself. From my understanding, Jeff, there's no time limit on when you can reimburse yourself for healthcare expenses, right? So like my kids' NICU visits, that let's say they cost us $20,000 between the 3 of them, I can save those receipts. And when I first retire, I can just tap my HSA and take a nice little vacation, right? Tax free.
That's my understanding.
Awesome. Okay. Hopefully no one from the IRS is listening. So, all right. So, okay. So catching up for retirement is a big one. I did another whiteboard fireside chat about this. So if you want to check out the YouTube age 50 plus, I think it's actually one of the first whiteboard fireside chats I did. It's age 50 plus wanting to catch up for retirement. So check that out. I went through in detail some of those opportunities there. Got to talk about sort of the aging parents, discussion here. And so this is, a sensitive topic for many, because some of you might be literally in this right now. I actually just brought on a client. Mom is still independent, but she just moved in with them. And so, you have this dynamic of, hey, you're retired or you're approaching retirement, but potentially caring for parents, and how that could potentially impact your retirement plan. So, this is one of those things that's definitely top of mind for our audience. And so, any thoughts or resources on where people could go, to sort of figure that out?
Yeah. Of course, everybody's mind probably goes to long-term care costs and nursing home care and things like that. And, you've probably talked about that on previous episodes and stuff, and long-term care insurance and stuff. But setting that aside for a moment, there's so many other things that you might forget about, or even if your parent is still able to take care of themselves, you still might find yourself traveling more often if you live out of state. That's going to cost money. You may find that if you are local and you're helping to be that caregiver, you have to take more time off work, or you have to step down in work a little bit to give yourself the opportunity to be that caregiver if that's the role you need to fill. You might even have to move, right? So again, maybe the parent is getting to the point where they can't care for themselves. You're not quite ready to have them go into a facility, or maybe you're on a waiting list to get into somewhere. You're going to have to relocate or, temporarily leave a spouse so you can come down and spend some time with mom or dad and help take care of them until they can get to where they need to be. So there's just so many things outside of just how much is this care going to cost?
Yeah.
There's an emotional toll. It's going to take away your mental energy, your bandwidth, your ability to stay on top of some of these other tasks, financial and otherwise, is going to suffer. So yes, it's something that, some of my clients have gone through, or it's going to be out there on the horizon for them someday. And so take the time now when everybody's able to have conversations around end of life, around care. Find a way to open up a conversation with your parents about their estate planning. So a personal story, I found that, my parents, I'm 41, my parents' estate planning hadn't been updated since I was under 18. So I'm not even on the documents as like somebody that can do anything because I'm 12 or 13. So they did get everything redone and everything's, up to date now. But you don't know what needs to be discussed. You don't know what needs a little bit of cleanup. And these are tough conversations to have, but we have to find a way to have.
Yeah, we used to call them family meetings, right? I remember at TIA, we used to call them the family meetings. And I feel like if you're in that 50 to 60 range, it's likely your parents are in their 70s or in their 80s, or even in their 90s. And one of the stats I constantly throw out to people that was such an eye-opener to me when I was doing the retirement income certified professional designation is that 70% of caregiving is done by an unpaid caregiver. So who are those people? Those are family members. And what we always hear from clients, when they're planning for retirement, and when I ask you, hey, Mr. Client, what's the plan if something were to happen to you if you were to need care? Oh, I'll self-insure. I'll self-fund long-term care. Well, that might be your plan in your brain, but if something were to happen to you, does your spouse know that plan? Do your children or your powers of attorney or your trustees, do they know that plan? Okay. If they don't, it's very likely mom or dad, or mom is more likely to just step in and take care of dad if dad needed care. Okay. So it's better have those conversations proactively. Go to dad and say, hey, dad, let's talk about, and some of that can be uncomfortable because, that generation may not be very open or transparent about finances, but it's more like, hey, if something happened to you, dad, what's the game plan? Like, do you have long-term care insurance? Do you have assets set aside? And if you do, make sure that's communicated to your loved ones, to your spouse, to give them that permission to spend down the money, because like oftentimes it's like, yeah, I plan to self-fund. And even if the spouse knows it, hey, there's some money set aside. There's always that, that concern in the back of the mind. I don't want to spend down the portfolio. I'll just do it myself for a while. And then what happens? Physical health, mental health deteriorates. And, by the time, the first spouse passes away, that second spouse, the surviving spouse is mentally drained. And it's tough for them to enjoy their retirement. So I guess, my plea is, like you said, just be open and somehow open the door for those conversations. And frankly, I found that, clients who have an awkward relationship with family members, sort of leaning on us, lean on your advisor, have your advisor facilitate that conversation, or blame your advisor. Hey, my advisor asked me, hey, hey, Kevin, or what's your care plan if mom or dad needed care? Are they taken care of? Or what's your care plan if you needed care? Just blame it on your advisor, and that could potentially facilitate, the door opening on that front. So
that's right.
Such an important conversation. And I've even had clients, I've had clients in the past buy long-term care insurance on mom and dad, because, maybe their parents are in their 70s, so they could still potentially qualify for a policy, but they're just not financially in a position where they could afford the insurance. And so therefore, our successful clients that are in their 40s or 50s that have the financial resources, instead of them being like, hey, are they going to move in with us? Or, do they have assets to pay where I'm going to have to pay out of pocket? Just hedge against that bet, buy the insurance on mom or dad, assuming they're healthy. And that way, they have a care plan themselves, that you facilitated. So that's another thing that I found has worked okay in the past too. But no one has a crystal ball. I mean, who knows if you're going to need care? I'm not saying you will need care. I remember we had Harley Gordon on, the godfather of the long-term care program. And, that's exactly his line. He's like, I'm not saying you're going to need care, but if you did, what would happen to your loved ones? How would they react to that? What is their game plan? And that's the most important thing. It's your care plan is not about you. It's about your loved ones. Anyways, enough about care. And yeah, estate planning documents. I think that's it's one of those things that it's surprising how many successful individuals that are in retirement or have saved multiple, seven figures or multiple seven figures that haven't updated their estate plan, or better or worse, don't even have an estate plan at all. I mean, so, Jeff, like, are you big on sending people to their local attorney to get it done? How involved are you with just getting clients to take action on this? Because I found it's one of those things that's very difficult to get people to pull the trigger on.
Yeah, getting clients to take action on that is tough. Unfortunately, what often puts it in focus is a tragedy or circumstance somewhere else in the family. A parent passes away. Oh no, now we need to get our stuff together because maybe theirs wasn't. And it was challenging to work through that. Or maybe their stuff was in good shape and you say, okay, we want to at least give our kids that same administrative experience with this. So I do think that we need to be there and encourage folks to get it done. For younger clients, for less complex cases, for just sort of getting some documents in place to make sure that we've got power of attorneys and whatnot, I have started looking at some of the electronic services out there. I say electronic, they're not really electronic. There's attorneys behind some of these software solutions, but trying to make it easy for clients. Once you get older, your assets become a little bit more complex. Your balance sheet is a little more complex. You might actually be looking at making some bequests or some specific kinds of gifts. Most certainly, if you have a blended family or anything that is really just going to making decisions about who handles what part of the estate plan or where assets go. I really like to cultivate a relationship with a local attorney. Here in Florida, it's nice because I can get to know some of the people out there and point clients in the right direction and know things are going to get done well. In other parts of the country, I like to lean on other advisors to say, hey, you live here. Who do you like working with?
Yeah.
But I think that just like a financial planner is going to ask you questions that you didn't expect to be asked necessarily, walk you through scenarios that you hadn't maybe thought of existing, that good estate planning attorney is going to say, hey, what if this happens? What if that happens, right? This person you want to take on a role. What if that person's not there or not able to? And then, on the back end of things, if there is some kind of problem or something does go wrong, you've also got a person to go to and say, hey, we worked on this together. We need to fix this now.
Yeah. Yeah. And truthfully, that's, for those of you that are in that 50 to 60 range, I mean, that could be a conversation that kind of facilitates everything we're talking about. Is like, hey, we just got our estate plan done. We just took care of that. And it just kind of prompted me to think, hey, I just wanted to make sure that y'all had your estate plan done, and then also, like, am I a decision maker on anything? Am I an executor? Am I a power of attorney? Am I a healthcare surrogate? Like, if so, I should probably have an idea of where things are. So I'm not just like playing detective if something ever happened to you. Because we've all had those situations happen where someone passes away, someone becomes incapacitated, and you're just like, oh, found another document. Oh, found another insurance policy, found another account. And it's just like, you could be proactive and just get that stuff cleaned up while you're healthy, while you're of sound mind. So that's good. That's good stuff.
And I think everybody should remember too, surprises are what hurt feelings, right? There's a money side to this, but there's also so many emotional, and everybody has been through or knows somebody where there was just family stress and maybe a rift that was created after somebody passed away or somebody was sick. And a lot of times it's because there was a surprise, right?
Yep.
Somebody was not included in a job within the estate plan and thought they would be included. Items we think about on a call like this, dividing up the retirement accounts, who's, selling the house.
Yep.
What about the heirlooms and the things around the house? Who wants the guitar? Who wants the piano? Who wants the jacket? Those are the things that probably cause just as much stress and just as much infighting in the family as the money. The money's easy to divide. So if you are thinking, well, I'll do this later, I'll do this next year, I don't have that much stuff, it's not that important, you probably have more than you think. And if you don't do something now, you're gonna surprise people, and that's not a time in a life when somebody wants to be surprised.
No, that is a solid point. I think that's great advice for anybody listening at any stage of life. Is your estate plan is not just your asset, your financial assets. It's also your personal assets, and some of them being really sentimental. And some of those things that you probably want to keep in the family, and maybe there's certain children or grandchildren that you want to have certain things, and others that other things, and so your kids, your grandkids the best, and so you can make those decisions for yourself. But great advice, and thanks for joining, Jeff. This has been awesome, man. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've it's been great just working with in our days in TIA, just being a colleague of yours, and just how professional you are in terms of serving your clients. You're a phenomenal advisor and planner, so I appreciate you jumping on the show and sharing your wisdom with our audience. And let's just close off. How can people connect with you? Of course, the Instagram I apply, and also your website. Just overall, how can people connect with you and find you if they want to engage with you?
Yeah, of course, you can find me on Instagram, like Kevin said, Dollars and Deadlifts, where you get lots of silly analogies between investing and weightlifting, like, diversification and, not doing the same lift over and over again, stuff like that. So you can find me there at Dollars and Deadlifts. You can find me on my website, createwealthfp.com. You need links to email me and schedule calls there and that sort of thing. So if you've got follow-up questions, would love to talk to anyone about that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. And just again, if you've been a follower of the podcast for a while, make sure to follow and subscribe on the YouTube channel, because we've been posting the videos there for the last couple of months, but we're just now ramping up and we're doing some additional videos outside of that. We're calling it the whiteboard fireside chats. And then soon enough, what's going to be coming later is going to be the links side fireside chats or link side chats. I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that yet, but it's going to be, golf course related, but I'm excited about that. But we've got several things on the pipeline. Like I mentioned, the life insurance ones, the catch up for retirement, the 4% rule, some of those things. So we've got a lot of cool stuff in there. So make sure to subscribe there. Make sure to connect with Jeff on Instagram. Make sure to check his website out. Until next time, this is Kevin Lao signing off.